Everyone has a kind of story they don't like, and even for as omnivorous as I can be with what kind of fiction I'll get into, I have things I just generally don't care for. Mecha, sports anime, and most of all, Shojo. At least up until recently, when several sports anime changed my impression, and one Shojo anime in particular has proven to be a far better experience than what I expected it to be. But before we go any further, I am on the warpath to get to 1,000 subs, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe. Thank you. Back to the video. Honey Lemon Soda is the subject of today's video, and it centers on the story of a very shy and reserved Uka Ishimori. Having been bullied all throughout junior high for her timidness, Ishimori decides to set out on a quest to change herself in high school. This, though, is met with a fair bit of adversity at first, as she ends up attending the same school as her bullies when she freezes up during her entrance exams for her first choice school. Now, my typical gripe about shoujo anime is how touchy-feely it can get when it overreacts to every minor thing that happens in the story. Overly emotional and extra sappy way of dealing with interpersonal conflicts just doesn't usually resonate with me. But in this show, it doesn't feel that way. Much of what Uka deals with is her previous experience with being bullied. Something that I find fairly compelling, especially since Uka spends the first few episodes of the series coming out of her shell to the point of confronting her bullies and moving on from all her trauma. Because of that, I find the compelling parts of her overcoming her own personal issues appealing enough to offset whatever negative aspect the touchy-feely shoujo elements bring to the table. And even then, it feels as though it's not as bad as the last couple of shoujo series I tried to get into on recommendations. Uka has a clear goal in this series, and the series is largely predicated on her own personal development. That means she's a dynamic character who undergoes change across the entire series as she continues to run up against her own nature, and in some cases the result of her reserved and timid nature. Case in point, there's a time where her overprotective father gets involved in her life as well. Out of what were purely good intentions on his part, he attempts to separate Uka from the friends she's made in her new school because he was under the impression that she was getting bullied by them. This comes right at the time when she's made a fair few friends for herself and become accepted into the class as someone reliable and worth counting on. She has finally reached a point that she's always wanted to be at, and now it's almost being taken away from her. But in the end, it was resolved, and the way it handled that family relationship, not trying to villainize the father too much for his mistake and overly controlling nature, and instead leading to a complete resolution and reconciliation, was a good way to go about it. If you haven't already realized it yet, the centerpiece of this whole show that makes it work is Uka Ishimori herself. It doesn't force her to be a coward for the entire series up until the end just so she can have a dramatic character turnaround. Instead, it opts largely for smaller and much more regular progressions for her as she makes new friends at school, becomes involved with her class, and assumes several responsibilities that would have been out of her wheelhouse previously. On top of that, she also works up the nerve to confront her bullies in several occasions. And even though it does all this over the course of basically this entire first season, and there isn't really anything huge or dramatic to happen, you can't really consider it one that drags its feet. Tropes that would normally get dragged out in these scenarios are handled quickly and effectively. So even though Uka is progressing as a person and becoming more confident in herself, she's still faced with new and different challenges that expose new weaknesses she never considered, and things she never would have thought of in her previous school career. And for that, the series makes good use of its main character. Really, though, the show isn't perfect. Like I said, it can be very shoujo at times with how it can be really introspective and sappy and all emotional on you. But that's not the only thing I don't care much for, and I will give it a pass in this because it's not really meant for men, it's written for young girls. The main love interest, Chimera, is a bit too mysterious at times. He seems overly complicated and a bit too much in certain occasions. Especially in this latest episode that decided to get a little bit more into his character, where he decided to start pushing Ishimori away. While he's largely a positive element to the series with how he encourages Uka, there are times where he just seems like a bad fit for how he acts. And when it comes to the music, something I do particularly love to listen to in anime, there is nothing in this show that I liked. Now that isn't a huge negative aspect to it, it's not going to make or break an anime, but in this case it is a little bit frustrating. The intro is one of my least favorite for the season, and I can kind of forgive that The terrible choice of background music is the bigger complaint I have, because in this show it often fails to establish a setting as anything other than somber and downcast because of the music it plays over everything. But really, my complaints end there, so the overall experience with this one is very positive. It has those several minor issues that are worth noting if you ask me, but it is overall a good anime and one that I have really enjoyed, much to my surprise.